You are listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. Sustainable World Radio brings you in-depth interviews, news, and commentary about exciting, creative, and innovative ways of living. Produced in Santa Barbara, California, Sustainable World focuses on positive solutions to environmental challenges, solutions that adhere to the permaculture ethics, earth care, people care, fair share. Are you interested in learning more about permaculture projects around the globe, how to plant a food forest, restorative design, or ethnobotany? Then stay tuned to Sustainable World Radio. I'm Jill Cloutier. What do you mean by the term sacred demise?
Well, there's quite a bit out there being written on logistical preparations for the enormous, unprecedented changes that we're facing right now in terms of peak oil, climate change, economic collapse, and how to prepare for those. But on a logistical level, but there's not been much written until my book on how to prepare emotionally and spiritually. And what I'm trying to get across in the book is that this demise is not a bad thing. Certainly it's going to have negative repercussions. It will be painful. But ultimately there's tremendous opportunity in this demise for planetary transformation and remaking the world, the way that humans were meant to live, as opposed to unbridled growth and consumption of resources and, all of the things that have brought us to this place.
And Carolyn, does sacred to you, when you use the word sacred, does that refer, and how does this differ from religious ideas of the end of the world and revelations?
Mm-hmm. I'm really glad you asked that question because, this is coming from a place of soul. This is coming from a place of, the ancient indigenous traditions that talk about our essential essence, which has nothing to do with organized religion. In fact, organized religion has been part of the problem in bringing us to where we are now. This has to do with our deep inner resources that have been lost in civilization, and with this demise, there's tremendous opportunity to reconnect with those inner resources.
And I loved what in your book you wrote that restoring life on a dying planet compels us to consciously and compassionately re-engage with the Earth community. And it's by breathing new life and love into every species of animal, plant, and mineral in our world. So it's not just something that we're engaging with our own species. Exactly.
I am a big fan of the geologian Thomas Berry, who recently passed away, and his wonderful work in a book called The Great Work talks about our connection with the Earth community, because we are that Earth community. We are the Earth. Our bodies are made up of the same chemicals, the same minerals, the same substance as the Earth. There is no separation, and that's been the problem that has led us to this demise.
Mm-hmm. That's my next question exactly, is how does that fit in with how we have ended up where we are in this place? Now, as a professor of history, and also I think you were a psychologist or are a psychologist as well.
I was a psychotherapist.
Psychotherapist. Yeah. As a historian, you have a long-term view of where we've been and possibly where we're going. Where does the place that we are right now, the sacred demise, fit in with history and where we've been in the past? Has there ever been a time like this, would you say?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that question because I like to talk about the historical aspect. Certainly there have been many civilizations that have collapsed, many cultures that have fallen apart and gone somewhere else, or they've just ceased to exist. But I don't think we've ever had in human history this configuration of a planet with 6.5 billion people, and at the same time this unbelievable, what I call the 3 E's, this convergence of energy challenges, economic challenges, and environmental challenges that are all influencing each other and bringing about truly unprecedented changes for the human species. Now, in terms of taking this a little further historically, I like to go back to, in terms of the beginning of Western civilization, when early Christianity, the hierarchy of early Christianity, began to put aside and persecute pagan groups, those groups and those peoples that were closely connected with the earth. And kind of over time, there grew, I think, a fear of the earth, as if the earth is, very archetypally connected with women, that somehow the earth is dirty and it's scary and it's wild and it's uncontrollable, and we need to divorce ourselves from it. And so increasingly we see this pulling away from the pagan traditions, pulling away from the feminine principle, and the establishment of an extremely male hierarchy, and everything begins to move up and away from the earth and heavenward, and let's ascend, let's go up and forward and forward and forward, and let's buy into this thing called progress. And so I believe that we're looking at the collapse of all of that, and I see that as really good news.
And it brings to mind that kind of overused saying, what we resist persists. And to me, it's like the earth is kind of shaking us up and saying, okay, you've ignored me for a long time, but look, your survival depends on my survival.
Exactly, yes. This is one of the good pieces of news, I think, in this collapse.
Carolyn, what you have written in the book, Sacred Demise, is that survival for us is not possible unless we surrender to collapse. What does that mean exactly, and how would one do that? That sounds a bit frightening to me. It's kind of letting go of all control and this surrendering feeling.
Yeah, exactly. It is letting go of control, and it is letting go of the idea that the most important thing is physical survival. We have to go back to the basics that none of us gets out of here alive. And that's part of what Western civilization has inculcated in us, is that, we're just going to go on forever and ever. There's no ending. In fact, there's a wonderful documentary called The Great Squeeze, in which James Howard Kunstler, who wrote The Long Emergency, makes a statement that Americans have lost a sense of the tragic. Now, what he meant by that is not that everything's horrible, but we've lost a sense of there's a beginning, there's a middle, and the end. And I think part of what collapse is trying to show us is that, the party is over. There's an end beginning happening, the end of something and the beginning of something else. And it really is about opening to that, allowing that to teach us who we need to be. In fact, one of the principal questions that goes throughout the book is, who do I want to be in the face of collapse? And yes, it's very challenging to let go, to be uncertain, to not know if one is going to physically survive. But to say to oneself, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is to be part of this transformation, and to do what I can do to help remake this remaking that is trying to happen.
And what do you believe, Carolyn, is the purpose or the job, maybe that's not the quite right way to say it, the human purpose in this collapse process?
Well, I think the human purpose in this collapse process is to go with it, to honor it, to allow the earth and these earth changes to teach us, to take us to our deepest self, our deepest humanity, our deepest divinity, so that we can leave a legacy here of real humanity and real earth connection for future generations. That's part of the purpose that I see. And then to really begin to understand that which has really been robbed from us, which is a sense of community, a sense of connection with other human beings and with the earth. And what that really means to know that we're not separate and to live as if we are connected.
Which it goes against the whole Western model that we've been entrenched in for the past.
Oh, yeah.
And I've heard on the news a couple days ago that the recession is over, it looks like, and and that things are going to be looking up and we must move forward. Can you tell, for those listeners who may be thinking, I don't really believe in this idea of a collapse, what supports your argument that the collapse is happening? And could you tell us, in your view, what is crumbling right now?
Okay. What is crumbling is everything. And, a few weeks ago we did hear a little bit about green shoots and things are going to turn around. This week, and I know that because I send out the Daily News Digest at Speaking Truth to Power every day, this week the forecast has really been abysmal. And there are two things that really travel together like Siamese twins, and I have to give credit to my friend Mike Rupert, who just published a Presidential Energy Policy, wonderful book, and in there he talks about the Siamese twins of energy and money. And so, we're hearing all this about a stimulus. Well, in order to recover from where we are, we're going to have more energy. And peak oil is clearly showing us that we're running out of cheap and abundant oil. And in order to get more oil, we're going to need money. So where do we get the money to get the more oil that isn't there? So it's really a chicken and egg kind of dilemma. I see all of the institutions collapsing. I mean, this is not rocket science. Look at healthcare. It's in shambles. It's not even, worth being called healthcare. So few people have access to it. Education is in shambles. I know people who have children in public schools and they're tearing their hair out, especially in California, although many other places. I'd love to be able to send my kids to private schools, but, I don't have the money and they got to go to public schools. And, we have all this standardized testing that is designed to make standardized children. Religion, obviously, is collapsing. Economics. Every institution is crumbling, and I think that's pretty obvious. And I met with a wonderful group of people the other night in Burlington, Vermont. About 30 people came out to hear me talk about Sacred Demise, and everyone was saying the same thing. This is a time of collapse, and they were not there in despair, chewing their nails. They were there saying, we want to be part of this emergence, part of this transformation that collapse is bringing forth.
And Carolyn, share with our listeners, as a historian, what tends to emerge from a time after a time of collapse?
Well, that depends, and it depends on your perspective. And my perspective is exceedingly local. I don't know what the bigger picture is going to look like in terms of world picture, but I, am very involved with groups that are focused on local solutions, local responses. Have been very involved within the last year with transition towns, and how that looks in communities. I think the transition model is giving us a really good picture of how that could look. There's no guarantee that it will look that way, in which all of these issues now that are crumbling in that the large institutions are crumbling around, that we address those on a local level. And that's going to be really challenging, but the sooner we get about the business of doing that, the easier it's going to be.
And, that, to me, it seems like transition towns, it's really dealing a lot with skill sets and coming together. Yeah. And I've done some interviews with people involved in transition towns. Now, this is one thing that your book brings up that I haven't really read about in a lot of permaculture books and other books that I've read on this topic, is the emotional component of this collapse. Because I know when my computer doesn't work, I tend to have a mini breakdown.
Yes, I know.
So
I know.
When your car, quote, collapses and doesn't work, when our computers don't work, we can freak out and really get emotional. Yeah. How can one cope with changes on such a colossal level?
Well, that is precisely why I wrote Sacred Demise. And Sacred Demise is a manual. It's a spiritual and emotional workbook for coping with this. And it's not a book that hopefully people just read and throw aside and say, oh, I read that, let's go on to something else. it's a toolbox that I hope people will keep around and keep going back to, because there are a lot of exercises in there that people can use every single day to help with this coping. And again, it's noticing our sense of entitlement. Oh, I deserve to have my computer working all the time. Oh, I deserve to have this car that'll just take me anywhere. And noticing that that's coming to an end. And then, saying, okay, so what is this teaching me? What is this trying to show me? Oh, communication. All right, maybe I need to now. Collapse is going to take me into a different mode of communication. Travel. I'm not going to have hydrocarbon energy for much longer. I may not be able to get parts for a car once it's not broken and I can't get it repaired. So how am I going to get around? All of these responses. It's about responses, and of course the big word in transition towns, resilience in the face of these changes.
And that, I see how that's almost like a Buddhist practice of observing your mind and saying, okay, what can this teach me? And also, what door can this open so I can see this problem in a different way?
Exactly. It is indeed a spiritual practice. Has nothing to do with religion. I don't even like to label it Buddhist, but it definitely has a lot of Buddhist principles in it. And that's going to be hard for people, which is why we need to start doing this emotional preparation now. Because we are not used to this. It's, I want what I want when I want it, and I want it now.
I remember probably 15, 20 years ago when I had just graduated from college, and I was sitting with a friend, and we were in this beautiful place, and he just looked at me and said, all our lives, we pretty much, aside from family turmoil and, individual turmoil, we've had it really, really well. And he said, do you ever get the feeling that things could change sometime in our lifetime? And I just remember thinking like,
Yeah.
And now here I am, and now here we are. I know that some of the changes that are going to be happening in your book, you talk about like avoidance, denial, numbness. Can you tell our listeners what are some ways that they can prepare emotionally and spiritually for some of these feelings that will be coming up, like avoidance, denial, numbness, things like that?
Sure. I like to go back to something really simple, although it's deceivingly simple, which is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's Stages of Grief. And, we hear the bad news. And our first response is, oh, that's not that bad. This is blown out of proportion. We will bounce back. We're Americans. We always do. And then, if we can allow ourselves to say, well, I'm going against all evidence to the contrary here to say we're going to bounce back because that's not happening. So what if it's true that Western civilization is collapsing? And then we allow ourselves to go into a little bit more reality. Certainly reading and watching of certain documentaries is very important, and I have a whole reading list and documentary list in the back of Sacred Demise. Many of the listeners who will be hearing this have already done their homework. And then we go through, we kind of go down through the layer of denial, it's like, and we take a deep breath. Oh, okay, so we are running out of hydrocarbon energy, and that is going to change everything, and that's really scary. And then we take another deep breath, and we get on through another layer, and then we run into some anger. And you say, oh, boy, who can I blame for this? And we start blaming political parties, or we start blaming presidents, or we start blaming corporations, or, and what it really gets down to is blaming a paradigm. It's a paradigm that has betrayed us. We say, okay, so that's my anger about that. And then maybe we start getting into some bargaining, These are the stages of grief from Kubler-Ross. Okay, well, maybe if I change all the light bulbs, I can avoid the consequences of peak oil. Or maybe if I buy a Prius, I can avoid all these consequences of collapse. And we go, no, bargaining isn't going to work. So what's really at the bottom of all of this is my grief. I am in deep and profound grief. Sharon Astick, who has a wonderful blog, SharonAstic.com, wrote a wonderful piece this week about grief, and I responded to it with an article in Energy Bulletin entitled, Grief Made in America is Not Good Grief. We've lost in civilization the ability to grieve. And we have myriad things around us that need to be grieved, starting with we're losing 200 species a day. We have dead zones in the ocean that are the size of countries. You know, this Earth was created for 6.5 billion people riding bicycles, not 8 billion people, which is where we're headed, who all want SUVs and 6,000 square foot houses. So there's so much loss that needs to be grieved. And as we allow ourselves to grieve, not all in one day, not all in one fell swoop, but little by little, then we come to a place of acceptance, which doesn't mean, oh, this is wonderful, but rather, yeah, this is how it is. So what's my place in this? What is my purpose in this? Which then allows us to reinvest our energy into the transformation process.
And with acceptance comes power.
Yes, absolutely. It's very empowering. I have felt so much power and really so much relief since I've allowed myself to just accept that, yep, we're in a state of collapse. And I don't know where that's going to go. It's pretty scary sometimes, pretty sad sometimes. But all of these opportunities await us. And it's really kind of relief off of a person's shoulders, I think.
And, you know, for the grieving aspect of watching the earth suffer, I think if you are in the grieving process of that, it's hard to maintain this Western kind of, you have to be motivated and get out and work, and it's hard to do both. And I think that's why people tend to shy away from that, because they can't compete and maintain this current...
Right. Well, you know, if you're in that mainstream of really believing in growth and the American dream, then of course, you know, you want to go up and up and up, and things are going to get better, and it's very difficult to say things are going down and they're not getting better. Now, what we see with millions of people unemployed, and I published a story this morning that was on Huffington Post, Down But Not Out, and this woman is talking about how liberating it's been to be unemployed. Now, yeah, she's struggling financially, but like so many people who've become unemployed recently, she's looking around and she's saying, okay, there's all this work that I've really been wanting to do, this creative work I've been wanting to do, this volunteering I've been wanting to do, this connection with people that I've been wanting to do. And it's really exciting that many people who are unemployed now, as they're still looking for jobs and trying to figure out how to survive, have all this space and this time to question the dream, the American dream, and begin to tap into their souls and do things that they've always really wanted to do. And I find that very exciting.
I've had quite a few friends who have been laid off, and all of them have actually said the same thing. It's opened up their life and freed up their time. And not to say that that's the same for everyone, of course,
right.
who has struggled with that. One thing that you said struck me about denial, and I feel like we're probably witnessing global denial in this, is techno fixes, green technology. We're going to be able to fix it in that way. Can you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, I think we need to go back to the reality, first of all, that no combination of renewable or hydrocarbon fuel or energy forms is going to spare us from a catastrophic energy collapse. So we should start there. You know, wind farms are great, solar panels are great, but, you know, just this week, Boone Pickens, who's the big oil guy in Texas, who's spent billions of dollars on buying wind turbines, all excited about putting those up and getting them up and running and you know, circulating electricity to other states. And other states now are saying, well, we really like this, but we can't get credit for this. So there's all these billions of dollars of wind turbines with nowhere to go, nothing to do. The same with solar panels. In a post-carbon world, where do you get solar panels that are made of plastic? These are things that we don't think about a whole bunch, and the limits. Technology is not going to save us. It's part of the problem. Now, certainly, I believe in technology. I'm a user of technology. But to believe that it's going to save us and spare us from collapse, again, it goes back to energy and money. Technology, where are you going to get the energy? Where are you going to get the money?
If I'm listening to this and then I'm starting to get this feeling of panic a little, and then it tends to lead to, well, what are we going to do? Is this just going to be like Mad Max, total chaos?
And what we're going to do and what we should be doing is we should be right now working with our local communities on this and preparing. In the transition handbook, there's a criteria that is given for what makes a transition town. It has to do with the ability, the preparation for powering down, the preparation for dealing with climate change, and on and on and on, a number of criteria. And there are now hundreds of transition towns around the country and the world, probably thousands in the world by now, and thousands of transition communities in the United States. And so we need to be, as soon as possible, working on this with our community and preparing with our households, with our neighbors, because it's going to be a really abrupt and traumatic transition. It won't even be a transition. It'll be a catastrophe, a falling off a cliff, if we're not preparing on some level. We're in a time of apocalypse, and a lot of people think that's, falling off a cliff. Really, what apocalypse means is unveiling. And I think it's an unveiling of who we really are as opposed to what we've known in Western civilization. And, John Michael Greer has written a wonderful book, The Long Descent, and in that book he talks about the difference between a predicament and a problem. In terms of energy, we've had this problem of energy with us for a long time. Our government has known for 6 decades that peak oil was a reality, and we did nothing to address the problem. As long as you have problems, something is a dilemma on the level of a problem, you can solve it. But after the problem is neglected for a while, then it becomes a predicament. And you can't solve predicaments. You can only respond to them. So I'm not interested in preventing collapse. I'm not interested in offering solutions, but I am interested in offering responses and, encouraging people to find those responses in their own depths and with each other in their local communities.
Now, Carolyn, do you see any models in the world at this time of places that have undergone a change even a bit similar to this, or is this kind of new territory?
Well, in many ways it is brand new territory, but I certainly, in your state, I certainly see Willits. I think Willits is a fabulous model. People working there really, really hard to make this happen on a small scale in small communities. Vermont, where I live, is doing wonderful things in this direction. Montpelier, Vermont, is now a transition town. They have an energy descent plan. They are working very hard to feed the entire town if need be. They're the transition group there is responsible for the first vegetable garden of any state house in the United States. So locally, I see a number of places and pockets where there are some good models. In terms of internationally, one country that I'm pretty much in awe of right now is Norway. Norway is a firm believer in peak oil. Norway is exporting some of its oil, but it's also stocking away a lot of its oil and using the profits of what it's exporting to put into the 401ks of its people. They have fabulous health care. People are gainfully employed. It's a country, and the New York Times featured an article on it recently, as did BBC News America, on how Norwegians are prospering in the midst of a global economic meltdown.
And that's a great model for us to look at. And it sounds like for them even to be socking away their oil, they are acknowledging that this is a reality.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Instead of just pretending like somehow it's going to turn around.
One of the things I loved, because BBC interviewed a number of people in Norway, citizens and public officials, and they all said, we have to think about our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. How can we not do that? And I don't hear too many Americans talking about that.
Well, that fits in with your idea that we're a culture of 2-year-olds.
Yep.
Because 2-year-olds don't have,
Exactly.
It's kind of all about me.
Well, as you're saying that, what strikes me is that one of the things this is going to bring about, I believe, is a culture of elders. And this goes to the point that I make in the book about this is an initiation. This is a rite of passage kind of experience. And rites of passage in indigenous cultures are painful. There's no guarantee that anyone, a boy or a girl who goes through that process is going to come out alive. But if they do come out alive, they are real men and real women, and they grow toward elderhood and that tremendously deep, broad connection with the earth that elders have. And I believe that this initiatory experience, which is what I see collapse being, is going to create much more a culture of elders. It's going to give us an opportunity to really grow up.
Mm-hmm. Which sounds like a welcome change, because we can't keep, it's like we're running over the edge of a cliff and we just keep going full force.
Yes.
So the brakes are being the brakes are are being pulled.
They're being applied whether we want to have them applied or not.
In your book, there's a lot of sobering topics in the book, but also you talk a bit about mirth making and savoring the moment. Can you tell our listeners about that? Yes.
Derek Jensen, you're probably familiar with him, author of The Endgame and A Culture of Make-Believe. Derek Jensen is up in Crescent City, California. Wonderful, wonderful philosopher and teacher, talking about various aspects of Earth connection and collapse. And one of my favorite quotes, which I think might be the one that begins the chapter on mirth making, is, we're really, really screwed and life is really, really good. And, I was just talking with a group of people recently over in Portland, Maine, where I did a workshop, and we were talking about how much fun we can have in this process. Yes, this is painful, and we're going to have to work our tails off, and it's going to be strenuous and onerous in many ways. And learning how to make shoes, or learning how to can, or some of these skills that we're going to need to be familiar with, that's going to be a real learning curve. And yet, there's tremendous opportunity here for having fun in the process, for deeply connecting with each other in a very, very joyful way, as well as in very sobering ways. I'm having a great time, Yes, it breaks my heart as I look around and see some of the painful things that are happening. And there's another part of me that is really, really having a good time doing what I'm doing and watching other people awaken and learn these new skills and learn this new information and turn their communities into transition communities. That's a hoot. I love it.
And can you tell us a bit, you do have a chapter in your book on what the creatures can teach us. Can you talk about that too?
Yeah. I just encourage people to, many of us have domestic pets, and if we've had domestic pets for any amount of time, we certainly know a deep and profound relationship that we can have with them. I encourage people, whether they have pets or not, to go out into the woods if they can and hang out with the bugs and hang out with the birds. And, I'm sitting here in rural Vermont, and I look out my window, and about a half mile away in the rolling hills are all these deer. And, I just sit and watch them. And, there's a wisdom. There is a wisdom that they have to give us, and I can't tell you exactly what it is. I can't say, well, go watch the deer and they'll show you ABC. But you will be changed if you deepen your relationship with these creatures.
And by deepening our relationships with ourselves, I think that can come too as we start to be able to deepen our relationship with the earth and the other creatures on the earth as well.
Well, absolutely. And see, what we've forgotten is that we're animals, it's Mary Oliver who says in that poem, you don't have to be good, you love the soft animal of your body. And this is a lot about, I believe, coming back into the body, coming back into our physicality, into our wildness. I strongly recommend a book by Bill Plotkin called Nature and Human Soul, where he talks about our deep connection with nature, and he's got some exercises in there for how we can strengthen it and access our wildness, our animal being, and love that animal being.
That's wonderful. And in your book, you did have a lot of wonderful poems. Do you have any poems that you would like to share?
Oh, gosh, where would I begin?
I love Mary Oliver too. Ugh.
Yes, she is just one of my favorites. Let me share the poem that the book ends with. This is a short one by one of my favorite poets, William Stafford, whose poems are so deeply connected with the earth. And this is what Sacred Demise is all about. And he says, it's called the thread. There is a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what things you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread. But it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you can do to stop time's unfolding, but you don't ever let go of the thread.
I love how you use poems to express such deep and profound concepts in the book, because it kind of touches us in a different way than just reading,
well,
text.
What it does, poems, and also I'm a storyteller and I tell stories with the African drum. When we do storytelling with a drum and when we read poetry, it taps into a whole different part of the physiology. It taps into soul and takes us out of the mind. It takes us out of linear thinking. It takes us out of that Western mode and takes us deep, deep into where I think collapse is wanting us to go, which is our essence.
And Carolyn, lastly, we have a couple minutes left. I'm wondering, and I know you did this earlier a bit talking about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, are there any exercises, like a short exercise for self-awareness or ways to help people cope emotionally with maybe the stress that they're feeling at this time?
Well, I have a whole bunch of exercises in the book, and certainly journaling is a very important piece. In the chapter at the end of where I talk about initiation, that's chapter 2, Paradigm Shift, and I talk a lot about initiation, and I ask questions at the end of the chapter, which I suggest people journal about. What have been some examples of initiation in my life? Because we've all had initiatory experiences, and they're always painful. And then the next question, how have I dealt with them? What do I wish I might have done differently? What did I do that I'm glad about? And then the next question, what are my greatest fears about collapse? How might I be able to lessen those fears? And finally, what initiatory opportunities might I look forward to in relation to collapse? So a whole bunch of the book is about looking at those feelings and being able to touch them and approach them. I have an exercise at the end of the next chapter regarding specifically Kubler-Ross's stages. And I just ask people, take some time to journal about your denial, anger, grief, acceptance, and reinvestments. So it's a tool book, and I really hope that people will pick up the toolbox and use it and take it with them and share it with others.
And how could someone, if you could give the title of your book and tell us how people can find your book.
Okay. Sacred Demise, Walking the Spiritual Path of Industrial Civilization's Collapse. It can be ordered at Amazon. It can be ordered at Barnes & Noble online. It can be ordered at my website, which is www.carolynbaker.net. You could also order it from your local bookstore. And I'd just like to mention one thing about my website, which is that I publish a daily news digest, which is a collection not only of news, but a lot of alternative news and particularly options for people who are preparing for collapse. So it's both news and options. I try to make it a weekly column called What Carolyn Really Thinks. I publish feature articles every day, and we're in a summer fundraiser, and we're going into a series where I'm interviewing people who've been preparing for some time and giving them an opportunity to talk about their process, their journey in making these preparations, where they've come from and where they are now and where they think they're going.
And so people can sign up to be part of your mailing list?
Absolutely, yeah. You can go to the homepage, carolynbaker.net, and over on the left side there's a big green button that says subscribe, and that's where you go to sign up. People can also email me at carolyn@carolynbaker.net.
And that's Carolyn.
Correct.
And Carolyn, what is if you could imagine that you have long-term vision, what would be your ideal vision of maybe after this collapse, maybe during the collapse and after? What's your vision for maybe the best-case scenario of what we're going through?
Well, my vision would be that as things become intensely local, that we really, really get to know our neighbors intimately, that we have small groups in our communities, depending on the size of the community, maybe many groups, which are doing, a lot of the things that the transition town model is doing, where we really work together with food security, with planting gardens, with composting, with our water supply, that we're providing health care for each other, that we're using community currencies, that we're educating our children in homeschools, and everything on a very small scale, living through the permaculture principles of working in everything we do with nature and not against it.
That sounds wonderful.
I don't know what that's going to actually look like and how long it might take for that to happen, but that's my vision. And it's really important, I feel, with all of the darkness that we're having to deal with and that we must deal with, hold alongside of that our vision. And I have a whole chapter on that in the book, how important it is to hold vision alongside reality.
And Carolyn, in your book, you also say the question right now, one of the questions is, who do you want to be in the face of collapse? And that's my question, I think my ending question to you is, who do you want to be in the face of collapse?
I want to be a person who is deeply connected with soul, with my deepest humanity, my deepest essence. I want to be connected with the earth and the earth community. I want to be in harmony and working with my human fellows to create local communities that are intensely different from what we have known before, and to move into this new paradigm with consciousness, deep embodiment, connected with my body and with the earth.
Well, thank you so much, Carolyn Baker, for this interview. It's been wonderful speaking with you.
Thank you for doing this, Jill. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. For more information or to hear our other podcasts or interviews, visit www.sustainableworldradio.com. Sustainable World Radio is produced by Jill Cloutier. Music by Dana Lyons. Thanks for listening.